The White Pill is available now at whitepillbook.com. This episode is brought to you by Patriot Gold. Good afternoon, Michael Malice here. Let that be your welcome for the next hour. We have with us one of my favorite people. I can honestly say that if push came to shove, I would feel comfortable giving him power of attorney. That's how much I like and respect him. Kmele Foster, returning guest. I'm not even kidding. Head of Free Think Media.
That.
He's one of the hosts of Fifth Column. Me and him see pretty much eye to eye on everything, to the point where he's got my name tattooed on his arm, but you can't really see the tattoos with the you people. Kmele, there are a couple of things I want to talk to you about. And actually, Brett, my producer, were just discussing this before we got on, and this made me think of something. I got the first royalties for the White Pill audiobook over the weekend. And it was, I did the math wrong. I wasn't expecting that much. I'm like, all right, let me splurge. Okay. Yeah. So I bought a handwritten poem from my favorite author, E. Nesbitt, from like 1904. That was $300, not that much. A signed Gertrude Stein book that was like $300. And then I'd lost my gym sneakers, and I don't know how that's even possible, but I'm like, you know what? Let me get a fancy pair of gym sneakers. And I got a pair of Japanese ones. They were, let me see the brand. It's called, what's this brand called? Enterprise Japan. So they were, probably hadn't heard of it. They were $300. It's not that easy for guys to splurge. Like my friend, when she splurges, she buys purses and they're like $4,000 each. But it adds up to $1,000, which is not nothing, but it was still. Point being, you and I got into it because you're also a clothes horse, right?
Yes.
But you like the brands. Yeah. I like the things that are a little off the beaten track. What is your relationship like now? Because I gave you shit about this with wearing those Yeezys.
I still love my Yeezys. This is actually the problem, and I still wear them. I wore them today, actually. There's several problems. One, I have exceptionally flat feet, so there are only particular shoes that actually feel good to wear, and the Boost soles in those Adidas, they fit the bill.
Wait, so they're actually quality sneakers, not just stylish.
They're phenomenal. I think they are phenomenal to wear. Yeah. Okay. I think that's generally agreed upon. But more than that, I'm already heavily invested. I mean, my sneaker collection is extensive. It over-indexes for Adidas products, specifically Yeezys and Boost products, for the reason I explained. I buy a lot of shoes and have bought a lot of shoes, but I'm not one of those people who buys the Jordans and leaves them in the box. Sure. I buy them. I will pay a premium for them, and I will wear them and dog them out because shoes are made to be worn, even when they're preposterously expensive shoes. And I don't want to talk about the most expensive shoe I've ever owned.
Is there an Excel file?
There was at some point. There is not anymore. I don't do that anymore.
I have the Excel file.
It became a little overwhelming and slightly embarrassing. So I don't do that. But I do. Well, you know what I do? I used to buy shoes on like StockX and GOAT. I don't do that so much anymore. Something about the arrival of my second child has kind of put a damper on that. But in the app, you can see your inventory and your past purchases, and it actually tracks the value of your shoe portfolio, which is weird. And again, I don't really want to get into that now. I will say that the most expensive shoe in the arsenal would probably retail for $2,500. Although, as I said, I wear it. So I don't know what it would actually cost today if I tried to sell it, but I won't be selling it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I had this dilemma when I was working on D.L. Hughley's book. He gave me a pair of handmade Italian leather boots.
Yes.
They were, I think, $3,000 or $2,000, like something crazy. It was more than my rent. And it's the kind of thing, like, do I wear these all the time or do I never wear them? And I've worn them twice because I'm really scared of scuffing them and you know, anything like that. So I really should sell them or do something with them. And actually, one more thing, and this is just to all the haters out there. This is really kind of drives me crazy. And this is one of those things where I can't correct people because I seem like a complete douche, but I'm comfortable doing it with someone I care about and who loves and respects me. There's a photo of me and Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray and Chris Williamson at Michaela Peterson's wedding, and I have on a pair of handmade, also from DL. I didn't buy these, suede Italian boots. The photo is black and white, so it looks like I have these scuffed, disgusting sneakers, and people always zoom in on it. And I can't be like, oh, do you have a problem with my suede leather boots? But that is the story behind that photo. But those I do wear.
As if that's not a thing. I mean, the Golden Goose makes these handcrafted Italian sneakers that are made to look distressed. They are distressed by hand.
Yes.
If you're making fun of someone else's fits, I mean, this is your first problem. But more than that, fashion is about confidence. It is about feeling good in what you are wearing. And it's not about the price paid. And I will say this, with the sneakers, there are particular brands that I have affection for, and they're often the major brands. With apparel, it's probably more likely that I'll develop a bit of a relationship with a particular brand at a particular point in time, but it could be anyone. Like one of my favorite brands is Officine Generale, which is this Parisian brand, which has, I think, one store in New York and another store that's coming in LA, and they're great. And it's just really basic stuff, and most people wouldn't know what it is if they saw it on the street. And then John Elliott, which is an American brand, and it's just, and I'm sure this is one of the sweatshirts. And I've got this in every possible color, and a pair of the denim in every color, as you do. And it's just a matter of finding what is comfortable and what works for you. And yeah, occasionally spoiling yourself. Treat yourself.
It's fun. And then every time you wear it, you can be reminded of like, oh, this is when I got the royalties for the audiobook.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's great. No, congratulations on the success of your book. I've purchased it. I have to admit, while I'm here, having purchased not only the digital copy, but also the audiobook, that I've yet to start reading it, but it is because I'm creating space. Well, what I do, because I have ADHD, is I listen and read simultaneously.
Okay.
And I got to create a cocoon for myself so that I can really digest the material. Because oftentimes, if I'm just reading it straight through, my mind might wander a little bit. If I'm only listening, my mind is definitely going to wander. But when I do both things, I'm like almost in the sensory deprivation chamber. And the Kindle allows me the opportunity to do the highlighting in a way that the audiobook, the Audible will kind of sort of do that, like clipping, but it's not searchable in the same way yet. So
don't feel too bad.
I want to create appropriate space.
I've got literally 80 books on my shelf to read. So it's going to be.
So you're like me then. You buy the books with the expectation that you will read them. I think I see a lot of people who have these shelves of books that they've assembled, and they, in some cases, pretend to have read all of them. But to the extent I'm buying books, usually they're digital anyways, I'm buying books so that I can read them eventually. So I've got a long list of things that still need to get read. The ones that are arrayed behind me are just my favorites.
So here's my at the moment. OCD. I own every book I've ever read, and I read every book I've ever owned. Sometimes it's digital, so I don't waste the space. But like, here's a problem. I saw this book from 1927. There's like no copies of it available online. It has the dust jacket. I'm like, all right, I want to buy it because it's cool. It was hell on earth getting through it, because this is some crackpot like analysis of Henry George from 1927 about creating an equitable society. And I forced myself to get through this, but it was a complete nightmare. And it's so crazy where it's just like, hey, send us your donation to tell us how much you want to contribute.
That's amazing.
To my crazy person house, but I did it. So it's brutal sometimes sticking to that rule.
Malice, you commit yourself to finishing every book?
Yes.
Wow. I couldn't do it. No,
you're smarter than me.
I will happily skim and skip, and I will put down books that seem worthless.
Oh, this is
I'll read the concluding section first just to see if this is actually going to be something that I will find at all interesting or satisfying.
Yeah. And now that I'm approaching my 70s, my time is very limited. And let me tell you, I could have used those hours much more fortuitously in my life, even if it was just watching crappy television. And I'll never get that time back. And I can't tell you one sentence in this book. Like it goes one way or the other. It's just like, I don't care about any of this. This is stupid.
Yeah, don't do that to yourself anymore.
Well, it's too bad. I've committed to that. I've committed to the bit, and now it's going to happen. I want to talk to you about something else. Then we're going to free flow with a little bit of conversation. one of the criticisms I always get online, because I think people are, and I'm sure you're going to agree with this, most people are not interested in hearing ideas. Their first approach is developing filters in order to dismiss the person with whom they're interacting, so that they can be can refrain from listening any further. And the human mind is and body is designed to conserve energy as much as possible. So you see this at the gym where it's like, all right, you could go home. You see this writer's block as a situation. There's so many mechanisms that the mind does to conserve its own energy momentum. It's also not a bad metric, because if inherently someone's a crackpot, the odds are low, not zero, that, it's probably going to be the cost is going to outweigh the benefit. So one of the ones I always get is, well, it's all well and good to be an anarchist because you don't have any kids, but once you have kids, it's going to go out the window. You know what you're talking about. This is kind of this emotionally stunted man-child worldview. And they point out fairly, Murray Rothbard never had kids. Ayn Rand, though she's not an anarchist, but certainly is beloved by anarchists of our persuasion, did not have kids. Emma Goldman never had kids. Alexander Berkman never had kids. You're a proud dad. Your kids are cute AF. How has that changed your ideology and worldview?
I'm confident it's changed my ideology or my worldview in certain ways, but not so much my ideology. The principal things that having children has done, and really it happened first with Leah, and it happened in a matter of seconds, was give me this immediate, the deep penetrating clarity about what was most important in the universe. And before that, I kind of wrestled with different things, and I expected to love my child, but the weird thing that happens to you biologically when you meet the first one is very hard to describe. Before my daughter was born, everyone said, it'll change you, but it really does get you in this particular way. But you and I are people who think very deeply about the philosophical commitments that we arrive at and the implications of them. And the reasons why we believe the things that we do is because we imagine this is actually how the world works. And these are values that are consistent with how the world works and how people are, not so much necessarily just how we would like for them to be. And we think that this is generally going to be beneficial for all of humanity. That's why we have these views. And my kids are humans, and it is still the case that I believe that individual liberty is highly compatible with human thriving, and that in general, checking power is a thing that is of great importance. And yes, I still believe that government that governs least governs best, and when men are ready for it, that is precisely what they ought to have. And I think for plenty of people who haven't really given any thought to anarchist ideas or principles, and I perhaps describe myself as a philosophical anarchist and a pragmatist as well. Believe we talked about that maybe last time I was here. I very much believe in that. I think that governments are obviously a mechanism for all sorts of horrendous evils. That doesn't mean that there can't be occasionally things that are good that come out of them. That doesn't mean that we can't make progress towards greater individual freedom and liberty while we have governments. And that doesn't mean that there aren't some policy changes or reforms that would be generally compatible with things being better than they are today that I wouldn't endorse. But in general, it does mean that I have this fundamental underlying belief about what it would look like if the DEA, the DOE, the BLM were all abolished tomorrow, and how great and wonderful what replaces it could be. And at a minimum, that it is at least feasible that a market could produce an outcome that is as good, if not dramatically better, than what we are getting out of those institutions today, or at least what they ostensibly are supposed to be doing, because oftentimes, their stated goals and the reality are completely different things.
Folks, Michael Malice here, podcaster, author, and yes, underwear model. Sheath is something that I wear every day, and the great thing about Sheath underwear is that they have dual pouch technology for both parts of your anatomy. They also have a girls line. I don't wear that stuff. Dave Smith might. Go to sheathunderwear.com and use promo code Malice. You get 20% off. It's great underwear for when it's cold. It's great underwear for when it's hot. And I wear it every single day because it's the best underwear I've ever owned. The first time they brought into the studio, I was like, what is this? And now I swear by it. And in fact, I model for them. It's got added comfort, added performance, added mobility. And there's something a little subversive about talking to someone while the whole time your underwear is cupping your junk. I'm not going to lie. I do enjoy that aspect of it. And folks, they're not just an underwear line. Sheath now has bamboo hoodies and shirts, which are really, really soft. So go to sheathunderwear.com, use promo code Malice. You get 20% off your order. Support the underwear that supports you and that supports the show. Folks, when you go to the bathroom, you close the door behind you, right? And you don't want random passersby looking in on you. Why would you let people look in on you when you go online? Your online privacy is important, so you should use ExpressVPN. Using the internet without a VPN is like going to the bathroom and not closing the door, because your ISP knows every single website you visit. They can sell this information to ad companies, to tech giants. They can use that data to target you. ExpressVPN creates a secure encrypted tunnel between your device and the internet, so your online activity can't be seen by anyone. And it works on phones, it works on laptops, it works on routers. Everyone who shares your Wi-Fi is protected. All you have to do is fire up the ExpressVPN app and click one button. It's as easy as closing the bathroom door, you savages. Get an extra 3 free months of ExpressVPN free by going to expressvpn.com/malice. That's expressvpn.com/malice for 3 extra months free. expressvpn.com/malice. Protect your data, protect your identity online. Let's get back to the show. This is kind of a softball question, but I know your answer, but I still want to hear your thoughts on it. How concerned are you as they're going to be entering school with what's been going on? You're obviously Jamaican. You're going to be much more socially conservative than most Americans. How concerned are you with do you think a lot of this is like what, how Reason calls like this kind of conservative moral panic? Or do you think there is like, okay, they're not playing around. This is something to be very worried about?
I have plenty of concerns. I think there are material concerns about the kind of social milieu, about quote unquote wokeness. And it's a word that I use with some qualifications, not because I don't think there's a problem, but because oftentimes for reasons you were explaining a moment ago, we get into these categorical denunciations, and it's not actually clear what I mean when I say wokeness. It is an insult. So the opprobrium is bare, and it's obvious that I disapprove of something. But when I meet you online or in person and you say something that seems like I don't like it, and I can just say and dismiss you with, all of you woke people, I'm not really engaging with your ideas necessarily. Yeah. So for that reason, I just have sort of disciplined myself to get away from that a little bit. But, there is something happening. It is definitely the case that there are teachers who have become extremely activist, particular school systems that are overrun with these kind of preposterous, identity obsessed people who pretend to be educators. But just as with the racial justice activists who imagine that every law enforcement officer is out hunting and murdering Black people for fun, there is a tremendous amount of overstatement. And I think it's important to acknowledge the fact that while I have grave concerns about the many people who would see my children and imagine them as fundamentally, even constitutionally disadvantaged on account of their appearance, that it is also the case that it's important to quantify and qualify your concerns, and that hysteria is not a strategy. And hysteria is generally not advisable. So I have my concerns, but I'm also fully prepared to have to defend my ideas and my values. And as someone who, as we were just describing, like has a lot of very unusual beliefs, there are plenty of things that teachers are going to say to my kids that I'm going to disagree with. If I'm not educating them at home, it's likely they're going to encounter ideas that I find disfavorable, and they'll be told things that are true that I disagree with fundamentally. And I have to think about, what is my role in a world like that, where, grandma is going to tell them that when my daughter asks questions about why the sky is blue, she'll say God did it. And the fact that there's a deeper and richer explanation that's my responsibility to work on that. And it doesn't mean that I'm content to allow schools to go about doing, any sort of evil that they may have in their minds. But I am not going to indulge hysterical panics that insist that we're looking at is Cultural Revolution 2.0. And I'm old enough to remember the DARE program, and I'm sure you do too.
I have a shirt upstairs.
And it was in every school. And shockingly, the DARE program didn't actually eradicate drug use. And my suspicion is that for all of the hysteria, for all of the talk about these issues, for all of the equity initiatives pursued by the Biden administration, a lot of that garbage is cash for clunkers. And I think talking about it in a way that makes it seem as though it is this new kind of overwhelming dark power that is bound to take over the world is giving it a kind of credit it does not deserve, and is in a way that people on the right in particular ought to understand well. Like, making that boogeyman is often beneficial to the boogeyman. I don't know if the Trump indictment, for example, isn't something that is going to result in Donald Trump being far more popular among his constituents. And if it backfires against the left, as so much of the things that they have done isn't going to make him the kind of person, or at least even his acolytes, the kind of people who are slightly more popular than they otherwise might be. And I think there's a lot of evidence that some of the critical race theory panic, some of the wokeness panic, which again doesn't suggest that these things don't matter or aren't real, but that some of those panics may have actually inspired people to double down, to be even more radical than they might have been otherwise, and to turn a blind eye at what are obvious excesses that most sensible people would generally not be in favor of.
Well, first of all, I think we're going to see this. We're recording this Monday. It's going to air on Wednesday. I think we're going to be proving Toni Morrison wrong, and Donald Trump is going to become officially the first Black president once he gets arrested. I tweeted out over the weekend, Donald Trump didn't kill himself, and then I just turned it off. I closed the browser. I'm like, all right, have fun with this one, guys. So that's going to be another fun little bomb to drop. But let me argue with you a little, not argue, push back a little bit. My concern with the education system isn't necessarily, my biggest concern isn't the critical race theory. The concern is about sexuality and gender, because I had Carol Markowitz. I don't know if you're friendly with her, or I'm sure you know who she is, New York Post columnist.
I definitely know her. We talked. I can say that we're friendly, but I don't know her terribly.
A good friend of mine. She's great. I just saw her in Miami. She was talking about how in her school in Brooklyn, a majority of her daughter's friends, I think middle school age or early high school age, were identifying as non-binary. When you start talking about things that are asymmetrical, like if you could teach someone, radicalized racial ideas, you can unteach them. That's whatever. That's ideas. When you're talking about things like stopping puberty and use of hormones, which have irrevocable consequences on the developing child's body, that I think is where, I don't know if there's room for hysteria, but certainly it's much more of a concern than simply, giving them a 1619 project version of history. That would be my bigger question for you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, look, I'll say this. I am probably less concerned about some of those issues than other people who I've sort of shared common cause with on a lot of the race and equity stuff. That said, the substantive questions about the use of hormones in young people, for example, about whether or not anyone is getting prescribed in general.
I got to interrupt you because this is something they always have this pedantic line. They go, no one's getting hormones, and that is technically correct.
It's just not true.
They're getting puberty blockers. So like they want to say, but like this is, I just feel audience, when they say no one's getting hormones, but they're getting puberty blockers. It's like,
hormone therapy.
You're playing a complete disingenuous shell game.
Sure. Yeah. And well, this is actually precisely the point that I was going to try to arrive at, that I think there are substantive conversations to be had about these issues. and really important debates about specific things like the efficacy of these treatments for young people in particular, to talk about that in a sane and informed way, I think is vitally important. And that requires getting past the hysteria on the left wherein people say, oh my God, if you object to pronouns or have questions about these issues, if you're raising questions about whether or not these treatments are safe, you want trans people to die. In fact, you are literally like spirit murdering children or something like that.
Right.
That's hysterical and it's counterproductive, and it makes it impossible to have serious, sober conversations about this. And in like manner, I do have to say that if on the right, the approach to this isn't one that's like grounded in compassion and empathy, and at a minimum can acknowledge that gender dysphoria and things like body integrity disorder are real conditions that some people are dealing with. And for someone to feel not at home in their own body, whether or not you believe that people can be born into their own bodies, is I can't think of something that's kind of more alarming and kind of hideous to imagine trying to live with and reconcile. Like, those people deserve our compassion and our consideration, and not wholesale mockery and enmity. And if you can begin at that place, I think it becomes possible, especially if you care enough, if this conversation is important enough to have, to try and make progress on these issues. And I would agree, absolutely. I don't want any school to be an indoctrination factory, but the fact that these kinds of things are happening in public schools doesn't shock me. And oftentimes the reality is that the schools that are indulging in this stuff in the worst possible ways, aside from some of the quote unquote elite schools where you're paying like $60,000 a year and all you're getting is this kind of weird social and political and philosophical indoctrination. But lots of horrible public schools retreat to this kind of propaganda because it's far easier to do that than to reform yourself. It's far easier to blame the decades of failure that your institution has contributed to on, say, white supremacy or some other kind of systemic injustice that has to be rooted out, rather than doing the exceptionally hard work of trying to build a rigorous academic institutions. In many cases, by the time we get to the weird culture war drama that is roiling a school board, like that school board has been a place that ought to have been abolished for decades, for years. These people don't actually care about and don't have a history of educating children. The fact that they're engaged in this ridiculous propaganda now is further evidence of that. And the case I've made all along, specifically with respect to the racial justice stuff, but I think it applies with the gender issues as well, is that every single parent in America ought to have the right to decide what school their children are going to, and to decide what schools are receiving resources for them. School choice should be at the forefront of any effort to combat the rise of these preposterous ideas in public education or in education, K through 12 education writ large. And it's not the end all and be all, but it is, in my estimation, part of any meaningful strategy to try to address this stuff. The reality is that people tried to ban CRT was in fact a chant. They imagined that they could use the force of government to try to expunge this stuff from society. And the reality is that in Brooklyn, part of the reason why things are so bad to the extent those numbers bear out, I haven't looked at that, is because it's Brooklyn. It's Planet Brooklyn. Even if the schools didn't include any of this stuff, it's still in the water there. You and I have both lived there. Like, we know what those places are like culturally. It's a stultifying monoculture, and this stuff gets around very, very quickly. And ignoring that fact, ignoring the actual resonance of these ideas, the deep reservoir that they draw upon, and the fact that it is in every institution in our society already. You're going to have to contend with this. It was always a preposterous fantasy to imagine that you could counter program your way out of this, that you could seize the institutions through government. And now, once you have control, your problems are over. No, this is with us. And you've got to think a little bit differently about what your responsibilities and obligations are. So again, I'm not saying I don't share some of the concern. I'm not saying that, you know, some of these things might not even be worse than I know. But in general, I mean, when we talk about solutions and strategy, like avoiding becoming part of the kind of what I've seen, the worst sort of elements of the reactionary response to it is something that is important to me. I just want to be sure I have my wits about me so I can respond to these things thoughtfully.
Folks, you can breathe some life into your backyard with fastgrowingtrees.com this spring. From shade to fresh fruit to privacy and natural beauty, let fastgrowingtrees.com help you plant your dream garden with their expert advice and fast, reliable shipping. They sent me a chocolate mimosa, which is a really cool tree. It's taller than me, not saying much, but now it's on my deck and I love it. You can join over 1.5 million happy Fast Growing Trees customers. You go to fastgrowingtrees.com/welcome now to get 15% off your entire order. 15% off at fastgrowingtrees.com/welcome. What's really cool about the site is you can put in what zone you're in geographically, and they will tell you what kind of trees would be happy in your climate. So that takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. And they've got a lot of cool stuff that you won't find at Home Depot or Lowe's or other stores like that. So I'm really pleased with what they sent me, and I water it whenever it needs it. fastgrowingtrees.com/welcome for 15% off. Folks, your welcome is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Hey, whether you love true crime or comedy or celebrity interviews, news, even motivational speakers, you call the shots on what's in your podcast queue, right? Guess what? Now you can call the shots on your auto insurance too. Enter the Name Your Price tool from Progressive. The Name Your Price tool puts you in charge of your auto insurance by working just the way it sounds. You tell Progressive how much you want to pay for car insurance, then they'll show you a variety of coverages that fit within your budget, giving you options. Now, that's something you want to press play on. It's easy to start a quote. You'll be able to choose the best option for you fast. It's just one of the many ways you can save with Progressive Insurance. Quote today at progressive.com to try the Name Your Price tool for yourself, and you can join the over 29 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company affiliates, pricing coverage match limited by state law. Let's get back to the show. Yeah, if you go to Times Square during Pride Month, it's flags everywhere, rainbow flags everywhere. It's not no government forced that to be the case. I've said many times that only corporate America can make sodomy and perversion seem downright boring, because it's packaged as having brunch with your friend and kissing on the cheek, and that's it. You know, it's really kind of devoid of any kind of hedonism or, you know, promiscuity or anything like that. So I'm going to give a point to, you know, I'm obviously agree with you completely on school choice, but I think that James Lindsay critique of the school choice movement bears listening to, specifically with the regard of private schools aren't going to be necessarily these bastions of individualism and free markets and free enterprise. Corporations, which are going to be running many of these private schools, are, if not as, I would say in many cases, far more ideologically driven, even if just for whatever reasons, maybe they don't mean it, but it's just what sells in Brooklyn, to be promoting these ideas and catering to those customers, to Karen, than it would be in a government school, which you have to accommodate everybody, and certain populations, especially Black Americans, are going to be far more receptive to this kind of nonsense than the average affluent white female liberal.
Yeah, well, I'm actually not sure about that, because in some of the polling I've seen on particular questions, like you know, where's race relations and stuff,
I'm talking about transgenderism and promoting like that. That's not going to fly.
Oh, that they're more likely to be skeptical of that stuff.
Yes,
you mean?
By far.
Yeah, they tend to be a lot more socially conservative. You mentioned my Jamaican pedigree. That I would say plenty of my relatives aren't conservative on these issues. They are vehemently transphobic and vehemently homophobic, to the point of acknowledging such things about themselves openly and proudly. So that's obviously not the way that you want to go. But I'd say you're right about that. There's likely to be some pushback, and I'll say that one of the things that has been like most heartbreaking to me is to watch what's happened to a lot of those no excuses public charter high schools in places like Brooklyn. These like storied programs that were able to achieve in communities that have been so profoundly underserved for so long, these remarkable matriculation rates, sending like 90% of their low income, predominantly minority student body, like from their high schools in some of the most difficult communities in the country off to university, like, for the first time in their family's history. Like those schools are remarkable places, and they used to have a mantra of no excuses. And in the last 3 years, they haven't just retreated from that, they've apologized for it and
Really?
repudiated it, because the new mantra is, that, it's not, you can't demand that much from these kids. Like, the system is the problem, and these kids aren't the problem. And there essentially there is a legitimate excuse for failing. And there's this phrase, the soft bigotry of low
Yes.
expectations, that George W. Bush made prominent.
Your hero.
And I've always hated it, because there's nothing soft about that kind of
Yeah.
bigotry.
Yeah.
In fact, I think in many cases it can be far more dangerous and insidious. Like, only in the most perverse kind of weird universe could we be trying to persuade people to believe that the entire system is arrayed against them and is cheering for their failure. That at every turn, everywhere they go, people are constantly, even when they're not trying to, going to be working to undermine them and discriminate against them. And we believe that teaching that sort of paranoia to children is somehow a good thing, a virtue.
Yeah.
It's completely insane. And it is among the most diabolical things that anyone could do to any child. So yeah, no, I think that there are real problems. They are in many instances profound and daunting, but I don't think there's any reason to lose hope, and I don't think that permits us to stop paying attention to, the details, and to the point where we get so pessimistic that we're willing to write the whole thing off, spend most of our time kind of talking about the ideological like roots of these bad ideas, and we spend almost no time doing the sort of stuff that you and I know is invaluable, like talking about the kind of that we want to live in, articulating our values in as forceful and in as compassionate and persuasive a way as possible. Like, then we're making a huge mistake.
Where, by the way, out of curiosity, where you're such a nomad, where, even though it's not easy to move with Imelda Marcos levels of shoes, where are you physically living right now?
Just outside of DC at the moment.
So
Although
you're
I'm
in
not really
Virginia.
sure how much longer that'll last. Yeah,
In
I generally
Okay.
just say outside of DC, but
Well,
Virginia, yeah.
well, there's a difference between Virginia and Maryland. That's why I asked.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Virginia makes a little more sense for me.
Yeah. What made you decide to, because you were in the Bay Area before that you were in
Hmm,
Brooklyn.
hmm.
What made you
Yeah, yeah.
decide on Virginia? And are you finding, as I have found, that there really is a big difference that I think's been exponentially magnified as a result of COVID between the
Hmm.
cultures in different states?
Oh, I mean, a massive difference, without a
Yeah.
doubt. And I'll answer the first question. I picked Virginia because my wife wanted to move to Virginia. When we were getting ready to have our second kid, we wanted to be closer to family. We're both from here
Okay.
originally. So that's why. That said, I mean, when I leave here, there's a very high probability that I'll end up closer to the West Coast or somewhere back closer to New York, because New York in particular is still the center of the media universe in some respects, and there are
Yes.
still reasons for me to be there regularly. But when I left New York in the summer of, not the summer, well, kind of the summer of 2020, but really removed properly in the fall of 2020, and I went to Marin County, which, just outside of San Francisco. Culturally, there are some similarities, but there are some important differences. But escaping that environment was good for me in ways that I couldn't have imagined. And even though there wasn't nearly as much kind of ideological diversity as I might have liked in Marin, um, it wasn't as kind of oppressively rigidly enforced the monoculture there. The hostility towards people who have differences of perspective.
Oh
And it might
yeah.
have been different if I looked different. Just was not the same
You mean if you were
in
good looking?
Marin. Like, well, I have a melanin force field, so it makes it easier for me to broach certain subjects and to defy particular conventions. To talk to you about your Black Lives Matter sign and say that I think it's ridiculous. And if you ever need help taking it down, because I suspect that'll be hard for you, just call me. I'll do it for you. I'll just throw it in the rubbish bin because I know that may give you some sort of trauma. That's the actual white fragility. Being able to remove your Black Lives Matter sign, the faded one that you put up in June of 2020, but you can't remove it unless it's in the dead of night.
They put it over their
neighbors notice.
refugees welcome sign.
Yes. Oh, the current thing.
It's really kind of interesting to me because I think there's a big misconception. Well, I don't think, I know, on the right of all these cities are interchangeable. And I got a lot of heat about, oh, you moved to Austin. That's just the San Francisco of Texas. Austin is very democratic, very liberal. That's fine. But if you're going to compare Austin and San Francisco, you're just out of your mind. It's completely psychotic.
And
it's interesting
and even for me, like living in Tiburon versus San Francisco city proper.
Yeah.
Like I went to San Francisco. My daughter had to attend school there for a little while. Fundamentally different. I mean, fundamentally different. There's a weird kind of mix of conservative sensibilities and progressive orthodoxy that exists outside of the city, because those people are sort of terrified by some of the dystopian things that have happened inside the city proper. And you've actually seen it. Like the backlash against that stuff in San Francisco has been somewhat beautiful to watch. The many good progressives who at this point are turning against a lot of the bad policies that were there before, I think is kind of wonderful. A lot of them are really smart, interesting people. I have some questions about their perspectives on drug policy in particular, but it's nobody's perfect. We can have those debates. I'm happy to do it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is what happened in '93, where after 4 years of Dinkins, and I remember crime rates were through the roof, and he was going to crack down on jaywalking, and they voted in Giuliani. This is the other thing. I think there's this meme and I think it's very fomented very heavily by conservative punditry, that everyone who's a Democratic voter has completely drank the Kool-Aid and they're going to vote in lockstep, and that might be ostensibly true to some extent. But Chesa Boudin did get recalled in San Francisco, and that wasn't because all of these people all of a sudden woke up and read Milton Friedman and they're like, oh, what was I thinking? They're at a certain level, people they'll still be hardcore Democrats, but if they are pragmatists in the sense of, if things are going to hell, some of them, and in this case enough, will be like, we got to choose something different.
Yeah, I mean, but you'll find these situations where you have Democrats that end up winning the races in these Democrat strongholds who are effectively, for all intents and purposes, conservatives. They're in all but name, but for a few issues, generally, they have the same populist economics, but they'll be like a law and order Democrat. And they will come in and win in places where they're not supposed to. And we've seen that over and over again. We see it play out on a smaller scale with these school board races across the country, where they will gut the entire school board and vote in a bunch of people who have much more kind of conservative, or at least less consistently progressive perspectives on a range of issues, specifically around the stuff that we were talking about a little bit earlier. So, even there, it kind of obscures just how profound a sea change there is, and just how willing people are to violate what are supposed to be the accepted norms of their party. But I mean, I think you and I both know that a lot of the worst excesses of the current like social justice milieu are not things that are generally supported by the rank and file. Like, these are the fetishes of elite activists. And in some cases, they're able to gain some prominence among the populace more generally, and people will pick up on the language and they'll start, using pronouns and such. But a lot of other people have questions about it. They don't feel comfortable with it, or they outright hate it. And in some cases, they may permit themselves to become sufficiently cowed that they won't say anything about it. But that generally does not last too long. that kind of fear like is not enough to keep you in power. And I don't think it's enough to win some sort of durable victory in terms of fundamentally transforming the culture in the way you want to.
Folks, men's closets were due for a radical reinvention, and Rhone, R-H-O-N-E, stepped up to the challenge. Their commuter collection is the most comfortable, breathable, and flexible set of products known to man. And here's why. Rhone's comfortable four-way stretch fabric provides breathability and flexibility that leaves you free to enjoy what life throws your way, from your commute to work to your 18 holes of golf. That's why they call it the commuter collection. It's time to feel confident without the hassle. With their wrinkle release technology, wrinkles disappear as you stretch and wear the products. It's that easy. And with their gold infusion anti-odor technology, you'll be smelling fresh and clean all day long. On top of that, 100% machine washable. You can ditch the dry cleaner all together. It's comfortable, it's mobile, it's versatile, and you can feel fresh after wearing it all day. The commuter collection gets you through any workday and straight into whatever comes next. Head to rhone.com/malice, R-H-O-N-E, and use promo code malice. You get 20% off. That's 20% off your entire order when you head to rhone.com/malice. Use code malice. It's time to find your corner office comfort. Let's get back to the show. I remember I was on The Independence with you. This must have been almost a decade ago at this point. And I was just making some kind of doom and gloom comment.
2014, yeah.
Yeah, and you were just like, everything's getting better all the time. And, you know, it was just like, it may not be true in terms of politics, and it may not, I don't think you said that literally, but, and not everything is getting better all the time. But if you look at metrics like infant mortality, life expectancy, you know, well, like there's so many metrics by which, wait a minute, the corporate press has an enormous incentive to catastrophize and to magnify crises. It's a great way for government to expand its power. If there's an emergency, you know, even you and I, if there's like some kind of fire and the government's like, all right, we're having there's an earthquake, we're going to have martial law. we're going to get these people out of the rubble. We're going to, you know, requisition all the food in the supermarkets. Even you and I are like, you know what, like this is not government at its worst. Like there's worse things to worry about, right? But that's a very effective mechanism, because now if you make everyone think there's an earthquake every 5 minutes, everything's on the table. But there are so many undercurrents, especially in the long view, that are so much more positive, that it's important for people to have that, not miss the forest for the trees. And I think you were key to kind of helping me snap out of it and get out of that kind of almost like a mantra of just repeating like everything sucks. It's like, no, it doesn't. Lots of things suck, and the things that suck often suck to the 10th, dialing up to 11, but that doesn't mean none of this positive stuff exists.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. No, we've talked about this before, and I think we at this point kind of strengthen one another's resolve in this respect. And it's important to have iron sharpening iron in that way. But it's also the case that we're not guaranteed to have things get better. It is not necessarily the case that this will happen, but we do in fact have to work towards this. And I'm fortunate to have a lot of friends, as I know you do as well, like in like the tech industry, who are doing a lot of remarkable and incredible things. And the mantra there, coined by Mark Andreessen, who I like, admire, and respect, is, you know, it's time to build. You actually have to go out and build it. You have to define the world that you want to live in, which is a phrase that he used with me one point, and probably doesn't even remember it, but that's always stuck with me. And that's hard, difficult work. Most people don't want to do the sort of world building. You're a writer, and I've been doing a little bit of that myself recently. But when you're writing something that requires world building, there's a tremendous amount of extra effort that goes into defining your terms and really establishing premises, and the sort of way that like Rand tries to do in her writing, which, you know, some people don't love it, but whatever. We don't have to talk about that part. I'm just saying in general, like she has to build a world and help you to imagine a set of values in a way that you hadn't before, something that you've always just accepted. You actually need to look at it closely, analyze it, and think about it and say, okay, that's what that implies. Am I comfortable with that? Is that what I want? What does a world look like if the values are fundamentally different? And is that actually compatible with what I would want? This is imperative, invaluable work, and ensuring that things continue to get better actually does require something of you. And figuring out what that is, I think is part of our our reason for being, or at least it ought to be.
What are your thoughts? Because you tend to have you're obviously not a partisan, to put it mildly. What are your thoughts as it looks like, Trump getting indicted possibly, and other DAs are kind of sharpening their knives? Do you think this is healthy for America? Do you think this is crossing a Rubicon? Do you think, you do the crime, you do the time? Like, I'm very curious to hear your take on this one.
Well, I mean, we got to separate a couple things. I mean, at this date, the indictment is still sealed, and I don't know what it says.
Sure.
My suspicion is that, or at least I'll put it this way, if it's based on what we know about the Stormy Daniels saga so far, I think David French's appraisal of things is very instructive. David French is a guy who loathes Donald Trump, who supported both impeachments, and who looks at the situation in New York and says that this is not a very good case. Even the New York Times describes it as a novel legal theory to take what is a misdemeanor where the statute of limitations ran out years ago, and to use this federal case that was never prosecuted, and to use that to turn this thing into a felony so that you can prosecute the man. This seems like an extraordinary effort to go through. It seems like something that is politically motivated. And to the extent it even has that appearance, I think it's incumbent upon people who are supposed to be public servants, who are supposed to care about the rule of law, to make every effort to ensure that people believe that this is being done in an impartial way. And that isn't being done in New York. That much, I think, is worth criticism, even before we see the indictment. But more than that, the way people have received this, and I'd say probably both on the left and the right in some respects, is very frustrating. The right is incurious about what's in the indictment, it seems.
Yeah.
And I think we have to at least allow for the possibility that Bragg found something horrible and that Donald Trump may in fact be guilty in a way that is worthy of prosecution. But on the left, the quote unquote criminal justice reform left that doesn't want to see people go to prison, you have an American citizen who's having a misdemeanor upgraded to a felony and is being pursued by the city in a way that seems incredibly determined. And they're not even remotely interested in whether or not these charges are legitimate. From their standpoint, is he's a bad guy, got to get him on something. That's gross too. And that is, I think, a bit distressing. And I don't want to live in a world where every person who runs for elected office runs the risk of being prosecuted by a state that is dominated by the other political party for any kind of preposterous, weird crime. And what Donald Trump is being prosecuted for in this particular case is effectively falsifying business records, misrepresenting things on his forms. And I mean, you and I know what the kind of voluminous legal code in the United States actually means. It means that everyone is guilty of something. Oh, yeah. There is something they could prosecute you for. You do not want to live in a world of completely arbitrary, totally politically motivated prosecutions. It's monstrous. It's destructive. And I think we have to at least be cautious of that. Is this the end of the world? Are we on the cusp of civil war? Only if we're morons. But it could be very bad. And the fact that more people aren't concerned about it in a sober way is the thing that's actually distressing to me.
I'm gonna spoiler alert. We are morons. So I think it's very difficult to look at the media that is consumed, including this show, and the people consuming it, and be like, well, this is a recent population that can look at nuance and separate personalities from the issues at hand. So,
but in that case, then it's a different sort of problem. This is it may not be as bad as you suspect, but it may be worse than you can imagine, which is a phrase that I used to say a lot back in the day when Donald Trump was potentially going to be president of the United States and eventually became president of the United States. And I said that for reasons you understand well.
Yes,
that things were already pretty bad. Like, there are plenty of terrible things that are happening. Anyone getting elected could do a lot of the most awful things imaginable. And you are completely unaware of that fact. And that, I think, is probably more the problem than a guy who is going to defy all of the norms once he's elected. So, and I actually still believe that to be the case, despite the things that have happened subsequently that other people might be a little bit more thrown off by, like January 6th. Although that's a whole nother thing.
I was on a Charlie Kirk show last week, and it got a little heated.
Oh, yeah?
And my point was, Donald Trump is pardoning or commuting, I don't remember exactly, Rod Blagojevich, Democratic governor of Illinois. He commuted or pardoned Kwame Kilpatrick, who had been a mayor, I believe, of Detroit. So the Democrats are incarcerating, or Tom DeLay, who had been the House Majority Leader, he went to jail and then later was exonerated. I'm going to assume he did something dirty. I don't think he's a particularly good person just because of the nature of his position. I haven't looked into it. Point being, if you have two tribes and one is imprisoning members of the other tribe, or at least, you know, being indicted and arrested is traumatic. I don't care who you are. It's not, you're in a jail cell. It's a trauma.
And if you're not individually wealthy, it can be personally ruinous.
Of course. And on the other side, you are freeing people from the other tribe. It's pretty clear to me which of those teams I'd want to be on and which one is winning. And Charlie kind of, you know, agreed with that point, but it's like, listen, if people get rewarded for acting in a certain, conservatives are supposed to understand this. Human beings respond to incentives. Thomas Sowell talks about this every 2 seconds. If me in my political career gets a boost by doing these effed up things and there's never any pushback or consequences, hell yeah, I'm going to keep doing it. Why wouldn't I?
Yeah. Yeah.
Any thoughts? I want to hear your thoughts.
I mean, I think I concur, but it also feels like similar to what I'm inclined to repeat some of what I said a moment ago. I mean, I see these excesses on the left and the right. I think that conservatives in many instances undermine their ability to lead on these issues or to speak with any sort of moral authority on these issues. Because when Donald Trump was running for office, like his mantra over and over again was lock her up. When talking about Hillary Clinton, you know, I am not the norms guy who's going to freak out every time someone says something that's a little off color. But I do think it is important when what we're talking about openly is politically prosecuting our political enemies. And we're doing it in these kind of vague and casual ways. Like it is a matter of the gravest importance when elected officials are being prosecuted by the state. And quite frankly, it's a matter of the gravest importance when anyone is likely to be deprived of their freedom by the state. And what I want to know is that process is as transparent and impartial as possible. And the specter of political bias and favoritism in those systems is something that has to be scrutinized heavily. And I think that is among the most kind of salient things that is on offer from the social justice left, who talks about these like systems that are fundamentally corrupt and that are routinely or systematically or fundamentally racist. That's an important allegation, and it deserves to be evaluated in a thoughtful and sober way. But one can't make that charge in a frivolous way, and one can't adjudicate that charge in a frivolous way. I think it's imperative to be kind of sober and serious in both respects. And again, I think that the willingness to do that, the appetite to do that, is what is severely lacking. And there are a lot of complicated reasons for that, and some not so complicated reasons. But we have to at least agree on the fact that is the value there that we want to defend and establish.
What do you see as this is a broad question, so there's two parts to it. What do you see as the biggest spots of hope for the future of America? And also, what are you most concerned about coming down the pike? Or the pipe? I never know what that expression is. Is it pipe? They both make sense.
I mean, it
right?
could be both. Both make a lot of sense. I think I'll accept both.
Okay.
I think the thing I'm most optimistic about is easier to think about. I mean, I have opportunities to interact with younger people, and I find that many of them are completely bored with some of the worst elements of our culture.
Okay.
They laugh at a lot of the ridiculous and the social justice stuff that's being pushed and promulgated. I find like that I get really inspired when I hear them again engaging openly in ridicule of the kind of sacred cows of the elites.
Because
I had
it's
an
so
opportunity to
prim and
go.
prissy. It's so hard to
Yes,
sell that
yeah.
kind of prissiness to kids.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I mean, this it's punk rock now to to push back against this stuff. I had an opportunity to go to Brown a couple of months back with Andrew Schultz for an event for this free speech student organization, and I mean, Schultz is there being Schultz with a room full of Brown students, maybe 350, 400 people, and he is cracking some jokes, and I mean, really going in. The word was used several times on campus and people laughed. Were there a couple of people who walked out? Yeah. Did they seem upset? I don't know, maybe. What they didn't do was shut
Did they
down the
them
event.
seem upset?
I mean, they didn't shut down the event. There wasn't some massive protest on campus beforehand or afterwards. And you know, while everything isn't great, that does seem to me a sign of progress. And I'm seeing a lot of kind of little rays of hope in that respect.
Kmele, before you get into what you're most pessimistic about with the future, I want to talk to the listeners about something that's important, which is preserving their money, and that's through Patriot Gold. Folks, if you've been on the fence about buying gold and silver, have you seen what's going on around us? The Silicon Valley Bank collapse, the government bailing them out with our taxpayer money, possibly Xi Jinping's meeting with Putin in Russia. And behind the scenes, while we're not paying attention, MasterCard, Citigroup, all those big global banking giants, they're starting a digital dollar pilot, or Biden bucks, which Biden has fast-tracked this development. What does that mean? It means that the Fed can monitor every transaction and devalue purchasing power even more. The corporate press wants you to watch Biden give away money to Ukraine. Even Republican presidential hopefuls are singing that same tune as they announce their bid for 2024. You know where else they have digital money? China. Yes, seriously. China's digital currency helps the CCP punish or coerce citizens with social credit systems. If a citizen commits a minor infraction, you can be blacklisted from traveling, going to restaurants, renting a home, or even having insurance. You don't think that could happen here? Look what happened during COVID. Digital is currently a major step in expanding digital authoritarianism. Meanwhile, according to Bloomberg, the world is in the midst of a macroeconomic reset, but the shining star is gold. The Wall Street Journal has stated that gold prices may be headed for record highs this year. So call the proud Americans of the Patriot Gold Group today before it's too late and mention my name. That's Michael Malice. You'll always get best-in-class service from Patriots protecting Patriots. Patriot Gold Group has the no fee for life IRA, where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold or silver. You may be eligible for the no fee for life IRA and qualifying rollovers. All you got to do is call 888-505-9845 to get a free investor guide, or just go to malicegold.com. Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer 6 years in a row. So call 888-505-9845 or just go to malicegold.com.
The thing that I suppose I'm most disconcerted by is what we've been talking about in general, that not enough people, that we may reach a point where not enough people have an appreciation for the most important underlying values. As we talked about earlier, I'm a philosophical anarchist, but I'm also like definitionally a classical liberal, and illiberalism is something that I think we have to safeguard against. And I'm seeing it's still the case that there's this normalization of political violence and pessimism about the liberal project, and I mean the small L there, that is really disconcerting to me. And a lot of the enthusiasm for that hasn't abated. So I want to see, I want to see that trend reversed. And to the extent I can be helpful in reversing it and winning people back to the side of presuming that free speech is something that ought to be defended and is not a weakness that is being indulged by weirdo libertarians, is like really vital. Like this is a necessary freedom. It is a necessary value that has to be defended and extended, quite frankly. And I want that freedom for myself, and I want it for the people who disagree with me. I do. And I'm happy to meet them on the field and to have arguments about anything on any given day. And at a minimum, where it becomes a little bit more thorny, like in the context of public education, I want us to have pained, agonizing conversations about where the limits ought to be, not to engage in this process of just kind of hand waving and saying, free speech doesn't matter here. That's not how this ought to work.
One of the big criticisms of Trump's biggest rival for the GOP nomination, Governor Ron DeSantis, is illiberalism and what he's portrayed as being kind of this authoritarian. What are your thoughts on that specific criticism and their validity?
Yeah, look, I think there is a great deal of hysteria where criticism of Ron DeSantis is involved. I also think that Ron has a tendency to play into that. When last week it was where he was talking about Donald Trump and whether or not he would participate if he needed to extradite him. He's talking about how he won't do it. And it's like, well, dude, that's not even your job. It has nothing to do with you. And you are really smart. You actually know that that's not your job. You're pretending here. The kind of preposterous campaign that he had against Disney because they offended him and were kind of going against him politically, whatever the merits of doing it, it's obvious that you were punishing them because they were doing something that you found disfavorable politically. And that is not the way that this is supposed to work. Is that tyranny? Is that fascism? No, it's not. Is it wrong? It is. It offends my sensibilities. And to do that while thumping your chest and suggesting that this is strength and this is an example of the kind of leadership you're going to bring is one, horrendous, and two, embarrassing. I think Ron is someone who actually led in a genuinely good and appropriate way during the pandemic and pushed back against a lot of the worst excesses of the federal government and didn't mimic a lot of the ridiculous mistakes that were made in places like San Francisco, for example. And Floridians rewarded him for that. He helped keep the schools open. And I think doing that improved the lives of children and improved the lives of Floridians relative to a number of other states. And he was rewarded for that by, winning re-election, but also Florida receiving a bunch of people who moved there for the weather, but also I think, a productive, successful political framework. But I think he undermines his efforts with the culture war shtick. And I think even though it resonates with a lot of conservatives, that leaning into it in this way might be among his greatest vulnerabilities in a general election. I prefer a much more sober political leader, and he's just disappointed me in that regard. So he's someone who perhaps could have been more impressive than he is. And in so much as I'm generally not a fan of any politician, how much do I hate him? I mean, not as much as plenty of other people.
But the thing is that counter to that is we live in drunken times.
Yes, sure.
So that's the.
I think that is true.
Yeah. Kmele, we're running out of time. What has been your favorite part of this interview?
My favorite part of every interaction with you is you. You are a thoughtful and interesting person who never ceases to surprise me. I think while plenty of people don't fully understand and appreciate how thoughtful and noble and good you are down deep at your core, they only see the trolling. I know you much better than that, and I appreciate our engagements. I appreciate our disagreements and our agreements, and I always come away from our interactions like feeling better about myself and having learned something. So there's me giving you, I hope what you receive is a very earnest compliment.
You are welcome.
Hey, Hey, this is Adam Carolla. Let me tell you about my podcast. We do it every single day, so you can subscribe, and there'll always be a fresh one waiting for you. It's about 2 hours of topical topics, and news, and guests, and comedians, and, of course, my own vitriolic take on just about everything that's going on in the world. Plus, we get a lot of really interesting, notable people who come in. We'll get politicians, we'll get tastemakers, we'll get stand-ups, we'll get authors, we'll get pundits, we'll get, I think about covers it all, celebrities as well. And we'll do some really interesting interviews with them. You can get The Adam Carolla Show wherever you download your podcast.
All month long on Pluto TV, stream the biggest Tyler Perry movies free. Watch your favorites like Medea's Witness Protection and Medea's Big Happy Family. Join Tyler Perry as he goes on a couples retreat with Sharon Leal in Why Did I Get Married? Or Idris Elba and Gabrielle Union in the Tyler Perry directed film Daddy's Little Girls. Plus, Pluto TV has hundreds of channels with thousands more movies and TV shows. Available on live and on demand. Download the free Pluto TV app on all your favorite devices and start streaming now. Pluto TV. Drop in, watch free.